Hey guys, finally getting around to doing the VTX and RX upgrade on this Tinyhawk Freestyle. I was planning on doing it sooner, but I don't really like having things just kind of hanging out and laying around and hanging by their wires, so I don't know, I kind of hesitated because I just like things neat and tidy. So I got a way to do things neat and tidy now, so let me show you what we're going to use. I have a Team Black Sheep Nano VTX. This is the 50 milliwatt VTX, not the one that goes up to 400, I think. I've got a XM Plus receiver. I just put some new antennae on here because the original antenna got ripped off in a crash on another quad. Hoping to finally get to use this Lumineer antenna. We'll see. I think it might just work on this quad. See, we'll put it out the back, something like that. Maybe angle it up a little bit. Not sure. And then the part that's going to make all this nice and neat and tidy is this, I can't remember the brand, it's something sleds, I don't remember. But it is a sled that you solder the VTX into, and then you also solder the receiver onto. Now this is designed for the TBS Crossfire receiver. It's designed to solder in right here with some pins. But I was doing my research, and if you look, the pinout for the XM Plus is actually the same. It's missing this last pin here, but that's not a big deal. We've got ground 5 volt, and then this is the S-Bus here. This 1 and 2 here, I'm not sure if 1 is S-Bus. If we trace it over to 1 here, yeah, it actually is S-Bus. So what you will do is we'll solder in the VTX here, and then I didn't get any pins with this because I already had this. I'm assuming that the Crossfire Nano comes with pins to solder these two together, but I've got some pins I can harvest from some other parts. So then you solder this in, and then the sled solders on to the top. I'm going to remove this VTX here, sled solders in on top, and then there's a couple of wires that go from here down. Well, we'll just be using one wire from here down to the UART port on the board, the main board. Alright, let me start. I want to weigh the quad, because I'm curious to see what the weight's going to go up to. We're going to be adding some stuff, we're going to be taking some stuff off, so hopefully it doesn't add too much weight on here. Now this quad's not stock. This has my 3D printed mounts on here. It has a Runcam Nano 2 and an XT30 connector. I think that's all I've changed on it. So let's see what it weighs right now. So 57.4 grams right now. Alright, let's get started with this. Okay, top plate is off. Now the next step is to take this VTX off. It has 2 connections here and 2 connections here. I'm going to just take my flush cuts and cut them right underneath where they connect. Oops, cut them right underneath where they connect on here. Get those 2 props off. I don't like taking the props off this if I don't have to because they are super duper tight. But with just those 2 off, it should be okay. So I'm going to get my flush cuts in here. Maybe. Trying to get them get them way out of the shot here. Trying to get them as close to the board as possible. I'm just going to nip that off there. That was a terrible sound, huh? And that one off there. Good. And they want you to take this top spacer off of here. So that's the VTX off. And they want you to pull these first spacers off. Like so. And like so. Now, that's probably not the best way to do it. I felt pretty confident about doing it that way because I've done this stuff quite a bit, and I figured it would be fine, which it was. But honestly, your best bet's to use a solder sucker, remove the connections, and then do it that way, but this works good. Alright, well that's off. Let me go ahead and mock up the sled on here. So the sled's going to go on just like this. Going to go on those pins, and then on those pins, theoretically. Alright, yeah, I'm going to have to move the pins around a little bit. I probably bent them a tiny bit when I was pulling the other VTX off. So I'll get those lined up properly. But anyway, it goes down on those pins, and then over on this post over here, and it sets nice and flush, and it's going to be a really clean install, I think. Next thing I need to do is get this Nano VTX soldered on the sled. It has a place for a button, but I'm going to be using Smart Audio Tramp. I don't remember which one it uses. Actually, I think TBS made Smart Audio, so it's probably Smart Audio. So let me bring my helping hands over here. And I may or may not be able to do this in the camera. And this just sits right inside here. Okay, this is going to be too tricky to solder and film at the same time, so I'm going to get this soldered up. Basically, you just solder all these pads, and then there's a couple on the sides that you solder as well. I'm going to get these soldered up, and then I'll show you when it's done. Alright, so that's all done. I soldered all these pins down here, and then these two up here, and then the instructions in the picture shows this one is not being soldered, but I tested it, and it's just a ground plane on both sides, and it adds extra support right where the antenna connector is, so I went ahead and soldered it anyway. Now the next instruction that they give is to add pins here and then here. I would have expected the sled to come with pins. It didn't. I don't know if the Crossfire receiver comes with pins, but I have my own pins. If you don't, you might be in trouble. Now it says to add 4 pins. I'm only going to add 3 because the XM Plus only has 3 pins. If you're doing this with the Crossfire, you know, you'd add your 4 pins and then your 2 here, whatever. So I'm just going to nip off 3 pins. This soldering was pretty tricky. There's air gap between all of these, and so it makes the jumping that gap kind of difficult. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't the easiest soldering job in the world. So I'm just going to add these 3 pins now, and then we will go from there. Alright, that's the receiver soldered on. Now I'm just going to nip the excess off the top with my flush cuts. And that's the sled basically done. Nice, neat, clean. I'm going to clean up this flux on here even though it's no clean flux. And then we'll get it mounted up in the quad. Alright guys, well that's the install pretty much done. I've got the XM Plus receiver soldered on top. I used these little standoffs to keep it away from the VTX. You may not need to do that. The instructions don't say to use the little standoffs, but I went ahead and left them on there on mine. I got, for the XM Plus, I've just got the 1 wire here going over to RX1. Okay, Ken from the future here. So you actually do not want to wire to the RX port underneath. There's an S-bus set of pads here that you want to wire the 1 over to the S-bus pad on those 3 pads. Don't get confused because it says S-bus right over here on the right, but that's not the S-bus pad. That's actually ground. It goes ground, 5 volts, then S-bus. S-bus is all the way over here on the left. I wired to ground at first and couldn't figure out why the receiver wasn't working, but that's what worked for me. The trickiest parts, I think, were soldering these pins here and these pins here. They are very close together. So I don't think this is a project for like your first soldering project, or maybe if you only have a cheap soldering iron with a big fat end on it, that kind of thing. Overall, it's a pretty well built product, but let's go ahead and plug it in and see if I got things wired up right or if we're going to make a smoke show. Okay, no smoke show. Take a quick look in the goggles here. I don't know if this is on the right channel or not, but as you can see, got a nice clear picture there. Alright, let me get the rest of this buttoned up, and like I said, I just need to reroute my wires and stuff like that, and then we will get test flight in. Alright, well there you go. As you can see, the bench is an absolute disaster, signaling another job well done. As you can see from the flight video, the reception is pretty good. I really like how everything turned out, and you can see how just neat and tidy it all is in there. I think this little Lumineer antenna is a great antenna for this. It fits in here perfectly, slides through this little notch right here. It's out of the way of the battery, sticks straight up. I really like it. Even at 25 milliwatts, this VTX is significantly better than the stock VTX was at 25 milliwatts. Okay, problems. The primary problem is I chose the TBS Unify Pro Nano, not the TBS Unify Pro 32 Nano, or Nano 32, or whatever they call it, the newer one. The reason I did this was, for this quad, I only really need 50 milliwatts. I don't really need to go up to anything above that because I don't really fly these huge distances, and as you saw in the video, it can go pretty far now. The other reason was I didn't want to overload the circuitry on the flight controller. I've heard people say that with certain VTXs you can blow your flight controller because it draws too much current. I didn't want to do that. The problem is apparently this VTX does not work with some flight controllers for smart audio. It's picky about the way the smart audio protocol works, and this flight controller appears to be one of those that it doesn't work with. That's not a big deal for me because I generally fly by myself on the same channel. I'm going to stick it to 50 milliwatts and leave it there. Other people, it might be more of a big deal, so it's something you want to think about. If you use the Pro 32 Nano, that supposedly does not have this issue. However, if you crank it all the way up to its full output power, you might risk blowing your board. These are all things, you know, when you're making modifications, you just need to be aware of. Risks are there. Just, you know, understand what you're doing when you're doing it. I think the sled worked out really well. It seems to mount in there pretty good. The only issues I found is if you need to do work to the flight controller, of course you're going to end up unsoldering the sled for some things. Alright guys, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it if you would subscribe and leave a comment down there. I make these videos to interact with you guys, so it's really cool to hear from you. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time.